Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to have all of you here today. Anviksha comes at a very challenging time, and we've mentioned that, and I thought I'd mention that again. It's been a difficult 24 hours for Nepal. It's something that we will reflect on throughout the day, and certainly in this session as well. Shashi Tharoor is one of India's finest authors. He's a parliamentarian. He's been a UN diplomat. His worldview really matters. It certainly matters for the subcontinent, and he's got a real vision of where India and Nepal can go. This is a session called Bridging Hearts and Borders. It's about people-to-people relations. In a time like this, and indeed, given where Nepal and India are, Dr. Tharoor, how important is it for India to listen more and perhaps talk less?
That's always been important, Vishnu. But first of all, let me say that I'm glad you started the way you did, because honestly, the moment one landed in Kathmandu, the story of the day that has been deeply troubling all of us has been the tragic news from the north. The apparently a fragment of a glacier, but a big fragment, broke off and devastated towns, rivers, areas that have essentially included eliminating roads and highways. 18 bridges have gone. There are 8 functioning hydroelectric stations that have been seriously damaged. This is a devastating tragedy, and we should not in any way minimize the importance of what has happened. And I must say that in some ways a metaphor for your topic today has been the instant response of the government of India. Already yesterday, a plane has landed with relief supplies. I'm sure there will be more. And whatever other assistance Nepal wants from us, we have to be ready to give. We are their nearest neighbor to begin with, but also this is something where bridging hearts and minds, as you said, and hearts and borders. I mean, the border, we say, is irrelevant when it comes to travel. It should certainly be irrelevant when it comes to help. And Nepal needs all the help it can get. And I think all of us in this room, Indians and Nepalese alike, will stand in solidarity with the victims, their loved ones, and all those who are today mourning and battling and searching for missing people. As an MP from India, I myself have had requests from people saying, so-and-so is missing, can you help? I've shared some of those with the ambassador. I think everyone is now looking. It was good news this morning that they found 19 or 20 Indians who had been earlier feared to have been lost. We hope they'll find more. The rescue efforts are proceeding apace. The Nepalese police, the army, disaster relief people. A lot is happening, and I'm so glad that you began absolutely with this moment of solidarity that both our countries really feel from the heart. And having said that, then back to your question. You know, Vishnu, I've always argued, and this is on the record, so there's nothing new in what I'm saying, that we needed very much to change our approach to Nepal. I did so when I was minister in the foreign ministry. I delivered the Lal Bahadur Shastri Memorial Lecture back in 2010, where I made this point about our neighbors in general and Nepal in particular. I continued articulating this view in the External Affairs Committee, which I chaired from 2014 to 19. And I was an open and public critic of the blockade episode in 2015. Of course, our government says there was no conscious blockade, certainly not from the government's part, but what de facto happened, I think, was a colossal blunder, a Himalayan blunder, to use a phrase, which I think was very damaging for us. And what I've been saying throughout since then has been that we need to show Nepal the respect that a sovereign, equal country deserves. All this roti-beti relationship that we keep talking about is real, it's important, it's valuable. But at the same time, we have to go beyond that. We have to show to the Nepalese that we respect them as an independent sovereign state, that their views are as important for us to listen to as we think our views are for them to listen to. And this process of respectful dialogue is, to my mind, fundamental to strengthen and take our relationship forward. On this, there can be no two opinions, and I think it's now clear that more and more people on both sides of the border have come to this view. And I think the earlier days, going back to the 1950 Friendship Treaty and the sort of implicit big brother attitude that India brought to the relationship, is rightly yielding to one where we are respecting Nepal, its independence, its sovereignty, its equality with us as a member state of the United Nations, as a sovereign state in this area, and in the same spirit that we are seeing how we can be helpful as a brother. You know, Vishnu, I have to be reminded, not I have to be reminded, I remember this from my research into the days of the 71 war, when, you know, the build-up to that war was going on, and at one point, Nepal was judged by many in India to be playing both sides, as it were, and there was a famous visit of the Pakistani foreign minister of the time in the middle of 1971 to Kathmandu. And at the press conference that was held after his visit, I think it was an Indian journalist, asked the Nepalese foreign minister, you're receiving these people at a time of such terrible tension between India and Pakistan, India, your brothers. And apparently the foreign minister replied, it was such a memorable quote, I'm going to quote it. He said, yes, India are our brothers, Pakistan are our friends. Pause. You can't choose your brothers. So that was ultimately a reminder that whereas the relationship was extremely close, there was something sort of unavoidable about it, even from the Nepali perspective. I'm talking more than 50 years ago. Whereas friendships are chosen. And I think it's important that while you can assume a brotherhood, you need to earn the friendship so that that choice is made by Nepal to be our friend.
You know, it's often a problem if journalists criticize journalists, but the reason I'm saying so is because I was here in 2015. I was covering the earthquake for more than a month, and I actually thought that we saw some of the worst of the Indian media. I saw OB vans charging down villages over here, reporters taking mics in the faces of people and asking them the most insensitive questions when they'd suffered so much.
Right.
The Nepalese people have a great deal of dignity. They've got a great deal of self-respect that needs to be looked at very carefully. Do you believe that that was, in a sense, a low chapter in how we treated people with whom we share a border, a proud civilization, and how that's a mistake that should never be repeated, particularly in the present context?
I agree. I mean, the fact is there have been other low chapters and even high moments. During that earthquake, the relief provided was significant, and that's something we can be proud of. But you're right, the manner in which the media behaved and the boosting, you know, the self-congratulatory tone that we are doing so much to help Nepal naturally grates. No one needs to be or needs to feel that they're in a position of needing assistance. And I think the last persons to remind somebody that they need assistance are the people giving that assistance. So I would stress to you that that was indeed, as you said, a low point. Even though the assistance was tangible, it was important, it was substantial, and it helped make a difference. But, you know, I had just visited Nepal a couple of months before the earthquake, and to see some of the places I'd been to in such pain and distress was heartbreaking. I was chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee at that time, and we had a number of conversations in the committee about how India's assistance could go. We didn't discuss the media, that wasn't our mandate, but I share with you the concern that everybody in India, all segments of our society, including your colleagues on the media, need to be as sensitive as I would like our government to be about this relationship.
You know, a little while back you spoke about the relationship and you characterized it as one being of Roti Beti Ka Rishta, that's a civilizational, old, historic link. Some say that it's based on, you know, the Hindu, Buddhist heritage, the pilgrimage association. But then there are others who turn around and say, but then, you know, looking at Nepal through that prism is over, it's gone. This is a government that has come to power on the basis of a social media ban. If they are communicating, it is on Instagram and YouTube. They are not communicating with either India or anybody else in different vocabulary or that old vocabulary. Do you think we need to get with it?
Totally. I mean, that's become apparent in India too, about our own young people, but certainly in Nepal. I mean, we have a 35-year-old prime minister here, and we have a government that not only has come to power partially or maybe principally on the backs of social media, and as you said, in reaction to a ban on social media, which is what transformed and ignited the protests, But we are also looking at a government which frankly is very conscious of social media, that gets its messaging done on social media, and that seems very much to be living in the glare of social media. So for us not to be sensitive, I'm not saying we're not sensitive, we are. I know from my friends in the ministry, including the embassy here, that they're very conscious of the changed framework of the game. And I think that that's important, that's right. As you say, we need to get with it. We need to understand not just the concerns, but also the vocabulary and the medium through which those concerns are coming our way. But I think we are in a good place. I think honestly, I'll be very blunt and say that we've all shared concerns about the relationship in the past. I am much less worried about the relationship now than I would have been even a few years ago. And I would say that today, the body language on both sides is positive. And the latest evidence of it, as I said, was yesterday's plane load of relief assistance.
You've seen this Gen Z revolution over here in Nepal. We've seen a young uprising in Bangladesh. We've seen, lots of protests in India. Gen Z again. What's happening?
Well, look, if you really want to take the frame a bit broader, for about 15 years now, there has been an extraordinary rise right across South Asia, all 6 major South Asian countries, of young people, of their frustrations, their hopes, their aspirations, and their determination to express them freely. It started with Myanmar, 2012. It went on, as you know, to Pakistan, with because a lot of the people on the streets at that time were in fact fairly young. Sri Lanka, don't forget, an entire government was overthrown by the Aragalia movement, whose average age would have been in the early 20s. And then, of course, as you rightly said, Nepal and India have also come. And, of course, we can't leave out Bangladesh, which, again, a government was overthrown. So you've got 6 South Asian countries that have seen various manifestations of youth reaction and a sort of Gen Z revolt. I think the difference amongst them is a reflection of the political systems in operation in each country and the attitude with which governments attempted to face or diffuse these situations. In Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, they couldn't, and the regimes were overthrown. And eventually Nepal ended up the same way, though not quite as comprehensively as Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, because though the existing government was overthrown, there was still a democratic process with an interim government and a free and fair election and a new government. So the structures remained more or less intact rather than a complete overthrow. I mean, as we saw in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, the rulers literally fleeing the country and a new force coming in, which in the case of Bangladesh was never elected, the interim government there. And the case of Sri Lanka was a compromise arrangement amongst elected officials, but was not in fact an elected government. And now, of course, elections are followed there, elections are followed in Bangladesh, and Nepal has already had elections, so you've got a different response there. What happened in Pakistan? The military, which had been behind the scenes, came forward and took over, and then again put up what we in India would regard as a puppet civilian government. In India, however, the mechanism was self-correcting. That is, a democratic system adapted itself to the new reality with what many would consider astonishing speed. No one expected the BJP government, which had had a reputation for being impervious to public demands for resignations. There have been at least half a dozen examples where the opposition had unanimously called for a particular leader, a minister, to be replaced or to resign or to step aside, and the BJP had throughout refused. In fact, Rajnath Singh in a famous press conference said, "We are not the Congress. No one will resign from our government." Suddenly somebody has resigned. And the recognition that democracy needs to be nimble enough to turn around and recognize a public reality, that I think was a tribute to the Indian system, in that our system bent, but it did not break. And I think that is an encouraging way for us to go forward. Myanmar, of course, is the other 6th country I didn't talk about here, which is, of course, the military openly destroying the democracy movement, and 14 years later having an election which, frankly, very many people don't take very seriously. So it's a different story. But the Indian example gives me some encouragement as an opposition figure that our democracy still has flexibility, still has openness, still has receptivity to popular currents. And that is essential if our democracy is to remain strong and effective.
You know, Dr. Tharoor, we are here in this session talking about people-to-people relations and Indians and Nepali people, but when that people-to-people equation extends from Nepal to China, we have a problem. Because we invariably see the relationship of, let's say, Bangladesh with China through an India prism, whereas all of these countries say that, look, you know, our relationship with India is independent of our relationship with China.
And that's what
and the hypocrisy is that we are trying to build our own equation with China.
No, also that's what we say about our relationships with any other country. I mean, we don't like the Americans to tell us how to conduct our relations with Russia, for example. It's the same logic that Nepal would like to use with India and China. But I would say that, you know, the Indian media, though it hasn't been too hyper of late, it needs to cool down a little bit. How much, I mean, for example, we are the biggest investors in Nepal. Indian companies account for 35% of the investment in Nepal. China is like a distant fourth. Okay, it's next after us the Americans, and I've forgotten who's third, but I think it's either Europe or Australia, one of the European countries or Australia, but the Chinese come forward. So we're not looking at a situation where China's presence in Nepal is overwhelming. Yes, you'll find some Chinese tourists coming, but again, our tourists are outstripping them massively in numbers. I'm told that one of the anomalies is that Nepal only counts tourist arrivals by air. So it's a serious undercounting of the Indian tourists who come by road, and yet we are by far the number one when it comes to tourists. And then the cultural presence is also real, which China, despite some shared Buddhist heritage, cannot match. So I would say let's chill a bit. We don't have to get overexcited about China's relationship, and Nepal has every right to have a relationship with China, with Chinese tourists, with Chinese businesses, have Chinese restaurants, let them do all of that. But as far as India is concerned, let us remember that our relationship stands on its own feet, and that we, as we began by talking about the respect we need to show Nepal, that respect should extend also to people-to-people relations. And I believe it does and it can. At the same time, we should be conscious that Nepal always has other options. You know, there was a time when pretty much any Nepali who studied outside Nepal was studying in India. Today there are Nepalese studying in Western countries, in Australia and Canada and so on, especially the more affluent segments of the middle class and above, just as Indians do. So why should we be offended by that? Again, any Nepali working outside Nepal used to work in India. Now there are Nepalese working in the Gulf, working in other countries. So what? I mean, my attitude to most people who worry about these developments is, why are we judging Nepal by a standard we wouldn't apply to ourselves? Our own people work in multiple countries. Our own people study in multiple countries. Nepalese are doing the same thing. Applaud it. They still, by the way, the largest single cohort studying in any country from Nepal is still in India. Yeah. The largest single cohort working in any country outside Nepal is still India. Yeah. So let's not overblow some of these things. Yeah.
If you are talking about people-to-people relations, then we have an incredible military tradition of soldiers from the Gorkha region of Nepal being part of the Gorkha regiments in the Indian Army. That's changed now because we've got a scheme called Agnipath. So young recruits, after a period of approximately 5 years, are eased out of the system, and then they take on different jobs. Now that doesn't necessarily work for people who have looked at the Indian Army as an avenue of employment for generations. And yet, by policy, we can't really do anything unless we drop the policy or change it. Do you see this as an important friction point?
No, this is genuinely an issue because, remember, the decision is not made really by the Nepalese government or anything, made by individual families. And remember that when you're talking about a lifetime career in the army, that's usually 20 years, and after 20 years you get a lifelong pension. So for many of the families, the career was important, but the pension was equally important. There are an estimated 100,000 Nepalese citizens living on Indian Army pensions. So for them, and for others who would want to emulate them, including the next generation of these families, there are people who had 4 generations serving in the Indian Army. And for them, this has certainly been a blow because the Agniveer scheme doesn't work in a way that would be attractive to them because it's that lifelong career. And the fierce loyalty that the Nepalese Gurkha feels, for example, requires an equal commitment on the other side. We are loyal to you too. We look after you and your family for life. So it's worth fighting and dying for us. That was the unspoken contract.
No, but isn't it really sad? I mean, if you look at the history of the Gorkha regiments in the Indian Army, I'm not criticizing the policy. I'm just asking from a historical standpoint. We've had incredible contributions of Nepali soldiers, officers, all of it. I mean, in our larger system, it's sad that that history is gone.
Well, I would argue that the government could still perhaps carve out an exception for people from this extraordinary tradition joining the army, that they don't have to come through the Agniveer scheme, that they could be taken directly, and the numbers are not vast, they're not comparable. But I think that one of the problems very bluntly behind the Indian government decision to create Agniveer was their concern about the size of the pension burden indefinitely. And because that was a factor, I mean, finance was a calculation in inventing the Agniveer scheme, I am not sure the Indian government will carve out any exceptions to it, especially one where pensions are a key part of the answer. So frankly, I don't know. I can't even tell you what we would do differently if we came to power, but I think my understanding from the Congress Party's initial criticisms of the Agniveer scheme is that we are still committed to reviewing that scheme if we come to power, for a number of reasons, including this.
All of a sudden, a couple of years back, the words Lipu Lake Pass suddenly emerged in conversations, and a difference in where the border lay over there. I know India and Nepal are talking very hard on this particular issue, but it remains a difficult issue on both sides. How do you look at this?
Well, it is a difficult issue every time it is raised, but what's important to watch is it always being raised? Aren't you impressed with the fact that this government has never mentioned Lipu Lake, and that our government has had no reason to raise it and say it must be settled? There's some issues that sometimes are best left on the back burner. We have far more important issues to sort out with this government. And as long as they don't feel that it needs to be elevated into an issue, why make an issue of it? Let's face it, the communist governments of the recent past were doing some political point scoring by raising it, issuing a stamp showing a disputed area, that sort of stuff. But that entire sort of overblown rhetoric has calmed down. And I think we as Indians don't need to be the ones raising it. It's not specifically an issue that's a priority for us unless the Nepalese choose to make it a priority, and there are far bigger fish to fry.
Let's start ending this, where we began, which was, looking at the tragedy. And I asked the foreign minister this question as well, that we have a shared environment ecology. Mm-hmm. This was triggered perhaps by an avalanche. It could have been triggered by a rise in global temperatures or temperatures in this region. Mm-hmm. How important is it for all of the Himalayan nations to be working together? Because this is the disaster which has probably already been initiated.
It is absolutely indispensable. And we noticed that the foreign minister very diplomatically, very politely mentioned that North India contributes far more to global warming than Nepal does. And that's a gentle reminder that we have a big share of the responsibility, just as we remind the Western industrialized world that they have a larger share of responsibility for global warming than we do. We didn't contribute to the extraordinary percentage of greenhouse gas emissions built up over the last 150 years by the developed West. Yeah. So similarly, Nepal is right to tell us, hey guys, you've done more and you need to get your act together. And I think we should agree with that and share with it, share the concerns. The responsibility is also vital for us because we too are affected. When glaciers melt in the Himalayas, when waters stop flowing, I know we're talking decades in the future, these have colossal consequences for India. We are at the moment benefiting from a rather bizarre phenomenon where we have not warmed to the degree that is expected. Other countries have warmed by as much as 2 degrees. We haven't. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason given is because our country is so polluted that the sun's rays are being bounced back by the polluted air. It's a ridiculous story. But even as we tackle our pollution, we're going to be getting more global warming. The colossal consequences of these are not small matters. Already we've seen tremendous variations in monsoon patterns. The larger global phenomenon has created the El Nino effect, which is affecting our monsoons. Yeah. We're also seeing some serious challenges in the mountains. If glaciers keep melting, this story today, nothing is 100% confirmed, it's expert surmises, is that in fact a large chunk of a glacier broke off. It could have broken off because of a small earthquake in Tibet. It could have broken off for some other reason, but it broke off because glacier melting is a real thing. Yeah. So whatever we can do and we don't even have enough glacier experts. Yeah. At a time when the Indian government is rightly now focusing on things like and the Arctic and the Antarctic as a matter of scientific interest to us because of its implications for our country, including geostrategic implications. Right next door to us is a potential world-class crisis in the making, and of course we have a moral and practical responsibility to work with those stakeholders in Nepal to address this problem.
It's been wonderful, Dr. Tharoor, speaking to you, building up or thinking deeply about the people-to-people relationship, going beyond past stereotypes, reworking our foreign relations positions, and perhaps recognizing that the nature of the threat or the adversary is common. We ended with the environment. Once again, let's think about those families missing and thinking about their loved ones. Thank you so much for speaking.
Thank you,
to us.
Vishnu. Very true.